In this lecture, we'll be attaching our armature to our mesh and going through some weight painting. Okay, so here's where we got up to last time. And in order to parent the rig to our mesh, I'll need to be in object mode, so Control Tab into object mode. I'll select the body and then the rig last. So that's the active object, the one we're parenting to. Now it's worth pointing out at this point that this character does have hair. We could select both the body and the hair and then the rig last, and they would both parent to the rig. But I'll leave it for now, just to show you that you can also parent the hair after we've parented the body. So I'll select just the body, then the rig, and Control P with automatic weights. Now to be fair, there's one thing I didn't do here. I didn't actually check the scale, so N on your keyboard, you might want to quickly check the scale. I know that mine's already set to 1, so I didn't need to do that. But generally it's good practice just to check here. I'll press N to get rid of that side panel, and let's check the weights. So this time I need the mesh to be the active object, so I can shift click the mesh, Control Tab to go to weight paint mode. I can also go to weight paint mode up here, of course. And let's control click on one of our bones and see how they're getting on. Often you have issues around the shoulder joint, so that's a good place to start. So I'll rotate this bone, and you can see that the chest kind of caves in a little bit there. It may be slightly different for you if you've got your bones in a slightly different position, but generally speaking, this is a very common problem. Lots of rigs will actually put a chest bone in to aid in this deformation. But I want to show you how we can kind of clear it up a little bit with weight painting. It doesn't seem too bad around the front, but around the back we've got a lot of cave in there. Now we can go to our brush, our draw brush, and set the weight to 0 and start painting in. And that works absolutely fine. But I want to show you another way of doing this, which is to get the smear brush and slowly smear the dark blue over the top of the other ones. That's a nice sort of gradual way of bringing the weights down. So rather than having a very hard change here, it will smear these together a bit. It's worth pointing out here that if you want to change the radius of your brush, you can press the F key for the shortcut, and that will speed things up for you. So I'll just rotate once again and see what we've got. That's not too bad, but I feel like we can take a little bit off here, and maybe a little bit from around here as well, and some from around the front here. Let's see how we're getting on. So it's digging in a fair bit here and at the back there, so we might want to use the blur brush to smear this around. I'll just reach the arm up again and then use the blur brush to kind of help this transformation a little bit. So again, that eases the weights a little bit. Let's try that. R to rotate, and that's not too bad. Because it's a low poly mesh, you're going to get a little bit of indentation here. That's unavoidable. But what I've got there is not too bad. I might try and blur this a little bit more. It looks like I've got a little bit too much here, so I'll go back to the smear brush. I'll make my brush a little bit bigger and just pull that across. So there's a little bit of overlap there, but that's not too bad. And like I say, with a low poly mesh, you're going to get a little bit of that. So let's see how we're getting on there. Let's just rotate the arm a bit there again. Perhaps just a little bit more off the neck. So with the smear brush, we'll just smear that in that way. And try again, looking at the top of the shoulder. We can probably come a little bit further with that. Just a little bit more around the front, and that looks good. Let's check the other weights around it. The one thing I did forget to do is auto normalize. I don't think that will make too much difference here, but I should turn that on. So under the options, auto normalize. Then when we're adding weights to one bone, it will be taking them off another one. In this case, we're taking off this bone, so it shouldn't make too much difference. Okay, so now's a good time to pause the video, catch up with me, and try and weight paint the arm so there's not too much of the chest collapsing around the front and the back, and take a little bit off the shoulder as well so it doesn't pull the shoulder around when it moves. Okay, now the good thing is that our mesh is mirrored, so we know that's going to be mirrored to the other side. There is an option up here, enable mesh symmetry in the x-axis. If your mesh is perfectly aligned and symmetrical but hasn't got a mirror modifier on the mesh, then you'll want to make sure that that button is ticked for your character. Let's take a look at some other areas and bones. So I'll control click on my target bone here and press G to grab and move it up. Notice that any of these control bones, if I click on them by control left click, they show the mesh as purple because they have no relationship. So I'll go back to this control bone to move it into a position, and let's have a look at this one, the upper thigh. That doesn't look too bad at all. That deformation's pretty good. I know it goes inside itself here, but again with the low poly mesh, that's quite common. You could try a little bit of the blur brush if you want to experiment here and see what sort of results you can get. But you can see what I'm doing there is making very little difference. it's always going to have this indentation really. And a lot of the time it's very difficult to avoid that pinching. It's worth saying at this point, for this character's mesh, we've got two modifiers. I've got the mirror modifier, as I've already mentioned, and we've now got an armature modifier that is added to any mesh that you parent to an armature. And under here, we do have some options, one of which is preserve volume. If I tick that, you can see that it does change the shape of the deformation in here. If I tick it and untick it, and also in the knee joint where there's a bend. It sometimes helps, but in this case, it's not giving us a great deal. The other problem I find with this is that it can't be exported to a game engine. So I always leave that off and try and get the weights as best I can without it. So pause the video here, catch it with me, take a look at the weights for your leg and make sure that you've got something similar to mine here. And like I say, you will have some indentation there, but don't worry too much about that. For the most part, you're just putting the leg into position and checking the weights aren't completely skewed in some way. Now it's worth going through and checking other places, so control left click and checking these different areas, making sure the toes are rotating as you'd expect. We can check areas of the torso, and that's all looking fairly good. I'll select all the bones and Alt-R and Alt-G to move them back. One place that's always worth checking is the neck. So the neck has some influence on the head here, which we want to get rid of. So I can use my smear brush and bring that down. Might want to smear some of this back up to the neck there, and that looks good. Then on the head, that looks good. Probably just a little bit more on the neck there. That's not too bad, and that's all working nicely. Okay, so pause the video here, check your other bone weights, especially the neck and the head. The last place you'll need to check then is the fingers, and because of our rig, the hands and fingers will need a bit of work. So if I control click on this, we can see that it's got influence on the fingers here. The thumb looks fine, but it's just the fingers that need a bit of work. So with the finger bone selected, this time I can't use the smear, so I'll change to the draw brush, turn the weight up to 1. And what will help here is to go to the active tool and workspace settings, under advanced, turn off front faces only, then I can easily paint in without too much issue. Go to top view, that will probably be easiest, and just paint in these areas. It doesn't always get the back faces, so I'll press Ctrl 7 on my numpad to go to bottom view here and get those in there. Let's just see what that looks like. With the auto normalize on, that should have taken away the weights of the hand here. We've got the thumb and the fingers, and we can test this out now. That's not too bad. I know, interestingly, I've made a mistake here. If I move my hand, it should move the thumb bone, and I've connected this thumb bone to the forearm. That's a useful mistake to leave in, so I won't change that, but you can see this thumb, you can see the relationship there is to the end of the forearm. It should be to the hand here because I should rotate my hand and the thumb should move with it. And that's a useful error to look at how we can sort it out. So I'll select all my bones again and press Alt-R and Alt-G just to get rid of the rotation of movement. I need to go into edit mode with my armature, so I need to go back into object mode first because I'm still on the mesh object as my active object. Into the bones, into edit mode, and this bone here I need to parent to this one here, so Control P, keep offset. And I'll show you that that shouldn't affect the weight paint, so back into object mode, shift select the mesh, so that's now our active object, and then into weight paint mode, and you can see that the weights haven't changed. I'll just check the hand bone movement now, and that's much better. Okay, so now's a good time to catch up with me, editing the weights of the fingers and connecting your thumb to your hand bone, not the forearm. Okay, so the last thing for us to do is to connect the hair up. So I'll go back into object mode. I'll select the hair and the rig, Control P with automatic weights, shift select the hair and go back to weight paint mode, Control click to select that bone, and we can see that that's all red and it hasn't got any influence from any other bones. So that's working absolutely fine. And that's a good example of how you can have several objects on one armature. And I'll just check that that's working okay and the hair is moving with the head, so that's good. So I'll go back into object mode and deselect all, and our character is now ready for some animation. So make sure you've caught up with me and that the hair is attached to the armature. And once you've done that, make sure you saved your work, ready for next time.